the previous two sessions. Last week we had Strover, who spoke to us about challenges that we have on the upstream side of of things. And today we are going to talk about the downstream issues. So last week it was about project preparation. What are some of the challenges there? And today we are talking about downstream. And I mean, there are different ways of thinking about this. One is that perhaps if you rush through to implementation, what today is talking to is the price that you will pay. And by price, it's not necessarily just in monetary terms. And I also just want to make this point that, there's this focus on infrastructure issues, which I think is quite timely. As you know that, government plans are that we will leverage infrastructure investments to propel faster and more inclusive economic growth. It is my view that unless we make time to stop and we reflect every so often, we will continue making the same mistakes that we've been making in the past. So what we know is that infrastructure outcomes have somewhat disappointed. I'm not saying we've made the wrong policy choice by saying that infrastructure should be at the center of our economic recovery and reconstruction strategy. That's not a mistake. What I'm saying is that the outcomes in many ways have disappointed, because if you look at it, I mean, many projects are stuck in the planning phase. And I understand that there's a lot more projects in planning at any given point than in implementation, but we know that there are projects that are simply stuck in the planning phase. And this again talks to issues that we discussed last year. We also know that we've got funding and financing constraints or issues which are exacerbated by procurement challenges, right? And those projects that actually get to implementation, which is generally much fewer, projects than what we see in the planning space, those experience some issues, which is what Veron is going to talk about. And to introduce Veron, I did not go with an elaborate, profile. Suffice to say that, Veron is an analyst in the Capital Projects Appraisals Unit in GTAC. And as I said, today she'll be talking about the most challenging, prevalent issues at implementation phase. And this is part of the work that we are actually doing to try and better understand issues and better advise government how best to roll out the expansion of infrastructure, and also at an accelerated pace. So, Veron, I ask that you please use the next 30 minutes just to go. Somebody muted me. 30 minutes to go through the presentation, and after that, we want to open up for question and answers, but even more importantly, discussions, because we don't profess to know absolutely everything that there is to know about this space. So we do look forward to learning from you as well. Over to you, Veron.
Thank you, Vukeya, and thank you everybody for joining for this presentation. I'm just gonna share my screen, and when I do that, I'm gonna switch off the camera. I just wanted you to put the face to the voice. Thank you. Okay, can I just get a confirmation whether you can see my presentation?
We can. Thank you, Veron.
Thank you. So as Vukeya was talking and giving some background on why we had to do this, So basically, there's a need to meet the desired policy objectives through the expansion and acceleration of infrastructure. And to do this, we need to get more infrastructure projects through the funnel, right? We have to get a greater number of projects through the funnel to reach investment decision or investment ready stage and execution stages within a shorter time frame, and also for them to be delivered much quicker than we are delivering right now. And for us to do that, there's a number of things that need to happen. To expand the infrastructure asset base and accelerate, we need to adopt like a different approach to how we've been doing things, because it's clearly not working. If we keep saying infrastructure is very important, let's prioritize it. We write that in our policies every other year, maybe 5 years, and yet, we're not seeing any traction there. But how do we get traction? And we need to do things differently, and differently in the way that we plan, prioritize, procure, execute, and manage infrastructure projects. And in some cases, we don't have to look for new approaches. We just need to optimize on existing systems and approaches, just make them more efficient than they are right now. And one of the other things we need to do is to address the many and varied systematic challenges that exist in the infrastructure value chain. So the focus on this is obviously on implementation challenges. We hope to better understand what these issues are and use those insights, to inform solutions that might come up to help us accomplish the set development policy targets and outcomes. So in doing this piece, the question was, so what are the problems? But before we got to the problems, we had to ask ourselves, okay, so let's look at the, the project environment. In project management, they use the project management, I think it's called the triple constraint theory. The triple constraint theory is a framework for evaluating competing demands that states that cost, time, scope, and well, yeah, those three are related. So if one changes, then another must also change. But when we augment it to make it a diamond, which is now called the project management diamond, we see that quality is added to the mix. And when we apply this concept to value for money, we see how all those four things would contribute. So, but what is value for money, right? We know that the success of a project, or the successful delivery of infrastructure project, is premised around the principle of value for money, which is achieved when available resources are utilized optimally to realize intended objectives and in the least cost-effective manner. But when you now apply it to the project management diamond, you know that those four elements, or I call them four factors, need to balance such that value for money is maximized. The challenge, however, is that to maximize value for money while making the trade-offs between the four factors, or keeping them in balance, and well, maybe we're going to get into that later, but the challenge is that maybe government hasn't been balancing that very well. So if the balance is suboptimal, value for money is not maximized. So examining infrastructure project outcomes from the project management diamond lens sheds light on why the public sector is failing to maximize value for money in its delivery of projects. I mean, we can just see that, if I asked you how we're doing in terms of costs or budget, you would probably not give me a very favorable answer. And unfortunately, it might apply to all those. Actually, it does apply to all those factors. But so what I've done is I've measured the infrastructure outcomes in terms of the four factors. This has led us to identify the 8 most prevalent implementation challenges. And these are the things you see. I like to call them symptoms, right? Because it's what you see and what you know and what you read about. And we thought that was important to start there because it's easy, right? To identify the things that are easily seen. And what we came up with, the 8, sorry, the 8 are things linked obviously to the project diamond, but we'll get to that in a little while. But the first challenge is obviously the persistent schedule delays and late delivery of projects. We set project timelines, we hardly ever meet them, and sometimes projects are delayed by like years. I call this the broken record because it's almost the norm in public sector. What we also see a lot of is obviously cost overruns, and This is when projects run over budget due to things like unexpected costs and obviously underestimation of costs. But we see that a lot. Projects were estimated to cost this much, but now it's like 5 times more, 3 times more. Yeah, that's a real issue, and we see it all the time. We also know that infrastructure provision is a very expensive thing for us to do. And I call that disproportionate because it's more expensive than it really needs to be. And some of the issues around that is the fact that we're highly dependent on outsourced services. And we over-specify our designs. We make them unnecessarily expensive. We like fancy buildings. It looks nice. I know it does look nice, but does it need to be that fancy? And most of the time, I think it's not up to us to decide, it's up to the owner. And if they want this expensive design, they get it. And the consequence of that is that the cost of operations and maintenance of that very fancy, expensive design becomes high. So the life cycle costs of the project then becomes high. And then infrastructure becomes very, very expensive to provide. And also there's also other cost inefficiencies in the way we provide infrastructure. Number 4 is the high incidence of leakage. We know that infrastructure projects are highly susceptible to corruption, theft, waste, and that's because of their size, complexity, and the fact that they go on for longer periods. I mean, it's easy for things to leak when there's just longer periods and people changing in between projects as well. So those are our first 4. And our last 4, the first being poor contract management and oversight. So what we find in the client environment, which is the project owners, whether that's a government department, a municipality, or entities, is that contracts are developed with inadequate controls. Like, how are you going to monitor? Are there penalties in place? Those kind of things are hardly ever there. And projects are implemented without regular monitoring and performance evaluation. Do you go see what's going on site? And do you sit down with the contractor and say, okay, this is what you were supposed to do. This is not what you were meant to do. And therefore, this is, how we're going to get back to it, and this is how you're going to pay for it. Not really. And obviously there also no contract terms, even when we do have controls or terms and conditions to cover ourselves when things go wrong and when contractors make mistakes, we still don't enforce them. So those are some of the issues we are seeing. And some examples on that is, when during the commissioning period, when you go on site and you realize actually the thing that's built is not what we said we wanted, or a certain quality issue, but then you don't enforce, you don't, make space or even allow them to rectify, or even maybe ask them to rectify or demand them to rectify as they should per contract. So it's the whole warranties, no diligence in terms of that is taken. And because of that, there's premature aging and disintegration of infrastructure. Poor quality of infrastructure. Infrastructure is built with substandard and inappropriate building materials. In addition, completed structure have defects and are not fit for intended use. That's speaking to the quality of the infrastructure we're seeing. So when you see a new building, you're like, did they just finish this? Because it's got cracks already and things like that. And that obviously also talks to the previous point about like oversight and things like that. And obviously it talks to other things like poor workmanship and stuff like that. So we also have improper skill risk allocation. And this talks to whether it's, in most cases that comes in during procurement, right? So you are taking on risks, or you're selecting strategies that may not necessarily match the kind of capacity you have, or your risk appetite, or your ability to manage and handle risks in your organization. So and that leads to you not, project failures in some way or the other. And then obviously more recently we've seen disruptions by business forums, and they do, cause delays. And as a result, not just delays, some of them are reported to be stealing stuff on site and stuff like that, which has cost implications. So yeah, those are our 8. But while that is our 8, we then come back to the project diamond and we see that actually, when you look at budget, we're doing poorly. Are we delivering within budget? The answer is no. Are we delivering on the time we said we would? The answer, unfortunately, is still no. How about quality issues and scope? We get scope creep all the time, and also quality is very poor. So basically, government is not delivering on time within budget and to specification, and is therefore compromising value for money. And this has been the main constraints to effective project delivery and the maximization of value for money in the way that we deliver infrastructure in the public sector. But when we carry on with the project management diamond perspective, the analysis further identified contributing factors and root causes of these constraints, but we're not going to go into that today because it's going to take a long time. But what I'm trying to say is we dug deep into trying to understand what's causing scope creep, what's leading to cost overruns and time delays and poor quality as well. So, but we're gonna focus on more lighter stuff today. But I mean, I could have just finished my presentation. I've given you the 8 challenges, but unfortunately that's not where it ends. Like I said, this is what we see. And what we know about what we see is that there's probably 90% of what we don't see, like the tip of the iceberg. And if this is the tip of the iceberg, what are the underlying, deeper underlying issues that we don't see? And as you all know, the things we are seeing are leading to inefficient use of available funds, and infrastructure that's not responding to the needs of the people at the time it's supposed to. It's obviously a missed opportunity in us addressing some of the most pressing socio-economic issues around how much transport costs, the availability of water or access to like functioning roads and things like that. So if we're not delivering the things that are needed, then we just sort of wasting money, aren't we? So a holistic view of the inefficiency needs one to consider the environment within which infrastructure is prepared, planned, and financed, and obviously procured, implemented, and managed, right? And because this has a direct bearing on the ease and pace at which, ease, pace, and scale at which projects are completed. And looking at the environment, I'm sure this is not moving. No, sorry, too quickly. Looking at the public infrastructure delivery system, we know that the system itself sort of acts as an anchor and an enabler for successful project delivery through a process that is inherently complex, lengthy, risky, and involves multiple interdependent stages. So planning and development, implementation, and obviously operations and maintenance stuff. And what you also know is that it requires a lot of role players that come in at different points with the project cycle, but they also have different skills that they bring in to have everything work together. And for a project to be successful, there needs to be proper planning at the top, everybody working together, and just alignment, synergies between all phases of an infrastructure to ensure construction of infrastructure and its utilization is in line with what was intended in the beginning. So this is where the client team comes in. The client team these are the municipalities, departments, and entities, internal resources responsible for providing direction and leadership over a project. So these are the people that decide what needs to happen. They do the prioritization at the top. We don't see that, right? So we don't really see the things that these people do. And then you see the project delivery team. And this one constitutes the professional service providers, contractors, project managers, and then they are the people that carry out the work on the project. And for government institutions that have the capability and capacity, this could be within the client department. And we have an implementing agent. This is not, it's not applicable to all projects, but where the client feels that they need, capacity or capability augmented, then get an implementing agent to execute projects on their behalf. In South Africa, that's mostly, there's a inclination to use public sector institutions as implementing agents, but private sector guys can also play the role. So now that we've seen the environment, we thought it would be good to just have a look at what are the systematic issues that come with the anchor, the anchor that's supposed to hold everything together, the anchor that's supposed to enable a successful delivery of any project. And what we know is, and Strober did touch about this last week, inadequate project preparation, planning and development. We know that policy objectives are really translated into concrete project ideas. We spend very little time in project preparation. We just want to execute. It's as if like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's just get to site. But the truth is it takes longer to plan. And I think people would rather just get something done than spend the time getting it ready for that. And as a result, projects are generally underdeveloped and do not respond to the needs of the intended users at the time that they're supposed to. That's very important. Timing is very important, because if you build a hospital that needed to be built years ago, then you're not really helping anyone. Maybe you'll half what is needed, but population growth would have, surpassed what, the demand would have been much larger than the project you had envisioned 5 years ago. And then we have the fact that we don't have a criterion at the moment that guides project prioritization and selection in the public sector. So everybody just prioritizes based on what they feeling, and and that leads to subjectivity and a lack of consistencies in the selection of projects. Sometimes you ask, I mean, we do a lot of BFI projects, and you can see the differences. You're like, how did you arrive at this project? And I mean, the answers are very different, and it just shows you that we probably need something that's more standard in the way we prioritize and select projects. Poor life cycle costs. We also see this a lot in the BFI, where project comes and you don't have a full grasp on how much it's going to cost in its life cycle. And that's talking to, we know how much it's going to cost to build, but they don't know how much it's going to cost to operate and maintain in the future. And this is why we end up with like a hospital that's sitting there. It's built, it's beautiful, but there's no staff to operate it, or there's no medication, because of poor life cycle costing. So you need to make the necessary planning, including financial, to make sure your infrastructure will be operational at the time that it needs to. The fourth systemic issue is the lack of clear roles and responsibilities and inadequate coordination. So government doesn't speak to each other. The way we make decisions and the way we plan, we don't consult. I mean, maybe we do consult, maybe we don't consult the right people. So the lack of integrated and coherent way that we make decisions is it's a big problem. And the roles and responsibilities are often blurred, unclear, and at times duplicated in government. And that's something that also makes the situation, or the system, really inefficient. The last one is the inadequate technical capacity and capability. I mean, we all know this. We don't really have a capable client, and that's because the people that are meant to be responsible for planning, specifying designs, or procuring, overseeing the implementation of projects and maintaining them do not have, the in-house skills and numbers to do that. Maybe it's not a number issue, maybe it's more a skills issue in that regard. Another issue is obviously the construction sector has also taken a blow with the shortage of certain contractors to do certain levels of work. The more complex, you might struggle to find, say, grade 9 contractors to do your work. So, I mean, we've seen, I've told you a lot of problems, and what you can gather from that is that the delivery system is inefficient. And you could argue, there's also other things at play here. And I agree, there are things at play, and some are beyond, the direct control of the client and delivery teams. But the fact remains that the delivery system is not efficient. But at the same time, we as the government are attempting to fast track and scale up delivery in this very same inefficient environment, which will only lead to more disappointing outcomes. I mean, I do see the point of having the goal, but maybe to work towards the goal is not to get more projects within the pipeline, but to actually address the challenges that exist to get the pipeline ready. And we have a few actions we have thought about. The first one is obviously getting the project planning and development rights. The idea is to standardize those things and ensure uniformity and consistency to facilitate the creation of a solid project pipeline. And we think there should also be a formalized authorization environment. Everybody at the moment does their own thing. And this is why we see varying levels of quality when we come to the BFI and we're assessing projects in the unit. Another thing we could do is obviously, I mean, we are so dead bent on the conventional way of doing procurement. It's always the conventional way. And maybe there needs to be like, a hard look at what other various procurement strategies are there, But in doing that, we need to take into account the complexity of the projects that we're working with, the risks that procurement strategy might impose. Because procurement strategy, it's a risk issue, right? You only bringing in so the services you buy or procure. Well, the strategy you adopt when procuring a service will determine who bears the risk, right? So if something goes wrong, you sort of already know just based on that. So if you know you have the appetite, then you can take on certain risks. But if you know you don't even have the capacity, for example, to manage contracts, why would you go with a procurement strategy that requires you to manage 2 contracts? So things like that need to happen, but that requires one to self-assess, to identify the areas of competence and weakness when selecting appropriate strategies for projects. The third one is a look at alternative financing models. There's an over-reliance on the fiscus to fund infrastructure projects, and we could also deal with, the infrastructure pricing issues that exist currently to strengthen cost recovery and explore alternative funding and financing sources outside the fiscus. But the fiscus obviously still has a role to play. It could support by obviously closing gaps like it is with the BFI, or non-financial support like unlocking, whatever. 2 more. So let's also have a capable client. I've spoken about this slightly earlier. The client teams should be capacitated. They need to be, and they need to have appropriate skills and experience. And we do this by appointing and making use of suitably qualified and experienced professionals, and also prioritizing skills transfer in dealings with implementing agents and professional service providers. Most times we just get these people to come do their job and they leave. There is no way of them transferring any of those skills to our people. So it's sort of like a perpetuating scenario where we just keep hiring consultants for the same thing and we just never learn in the process. In addition, best practice should be institutionalized, and this will help, build a credible project pipeline and support successful project delivery and management of infrastructure. Lastly, it's around governance issues. We need to strengthen project governance practices, and accountability, responsibility, and oversight over projects should be strengthened by standardizing practices on how projects are managed and overseen. And obviously, enforcement is equally important. I mean, the sectors that have standards and norms, but those are not being enforced, and therefore do people just keep doing the same thing? And we need to see changes in the way that is being done in order to fast track and expand, the infrastructure base and meet this policy objectives. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Veron. And you came in under 30 minutes, which means you didn't go over your allocated time. So clearly you are efficient. So thank you very much for the presentation. Colleagues, as I said, we've now had our formal presentation, and I see a lot of clapping of hands. Yeah, I agree. In fact, I mean, when we were preparing for this session, one of the issues that I was concerned about was that we might add to the frustration that sometimes people experience, where you just come into a session, you get told all these many negative issues, but at the end you are not necessarily told, this is what we could do to try and resolve those issues. So thank you for venturing somewhat into some of the challenges. We know that the problem is multi-pronged, and therefore even the solutions I sort of need to be quite nuanced in order to fully deal with the issues that we are talking about. So, colleagues, I mean, this is the time for us, I suppose, firstly to take questions, and we try and answer, but also just to open it up for broader, discussions and inputs in terms of what we are seeing and what your experiences are, and we can see, how best we can assist each other in this process. Oh, I see the first person is Andrew. Hi, Andrew. You may ask your question. Please identify yourself.
Hello, there you go.
can-
Thank you
Hello.
very much, Veron. So you've set out very well the kinds of things that concern all of us in respect of infrastructure delivery and implementation. So I want to be a bit provocative because I'm worried that you're generalizing across a very varied landscape. And when you think about this as a public implementation set of issues, surely we need to be careful about not painting the whole of government or the whole of the public sector or the whole of the infrastructure environment in the same way. There are parts of the system that work well, there are parts of the system that work badly. So that's the first point. I think it would be interesting to sort of take the issues that you've raised and ask questions about what parts of the overall client landscape, municipalities, cities versus smaller towns, provinces versus each other, the various departments involved in their agencies, ask what parts of the system are working well and what parts are not working well. And the infrastructure sort of reviews, I can't remember what they're called, that have been done from time to time by the industry or the CIDB, perhaps help us a bit in that respect. And the bigger question I want to ask is this: and it's about the balance between spending enough and spending it well. And for a decade or so, for at least 12, 13, 14 years now, we just have not made progress in spending enough. And I wonder whether some of the symptoms of problems are a consequence of the level of activity not being sufficient. In other words, we're not seeing enough infrastructure spending, so we're not seeing the progress towards better efficiency, better management that come from, think about the cost, coming down the cost curve in the renewable energy program. You come down the cost curve because enough activity is happening for people to learn, businesses to get experience, project managers to learn how to manage better, costing to be done on the basis of more evidence, etc. If there's not enough activity, then quality deteriorates. I very much believe in investment, particularly investment activity, as generating improvements in productivity and management. And so I wonder whether we're not in a phase now where the lack of investment activity, lack of infrastructure activity is a kind of vicious spiral that is reinforcing these negative trends. And I'm not sure that when you, I wonder whether when you look at some of the better managed parts of the system, I think you might find that the kind of performance we're seeing is not different from what you would see in other countries, in other circumstances. Quite a lot of variety. Let's put our efforts into the places that work and try to build capacity. Okay, so just I guess in the end, I'm wanting a bit more evidence for how bad things are in respect of the eight categories that you identified, and I think we'll find it's a mixed bag, and it's not all as disastrous as you're describing.
All right, thanks for your inputs, Andrew. Can I take that's Pitso and Landiwe, and then I'm going to hand over after Landiwe over to Veron to respond to some of the issues before we take another round of questions and points. Pitso, followed by Landiwe.
Thank you, Boitumelo, and thank you to Veron, and thank you to the team for this wonderful session. I think it's very meaningful and value adding. I think for mine, I'm just going to make a quick because I like to simplify things. Simple comments, whether Veron will does not necessarily need to, it's something that I think the team in here just need to reflect on. The first thing I think when I say we, I'm referring we as a public servant, whether you are working as a public servant, direct or indirect, indirectly could be through contract or whatever. But as long as you are adding value towards the work of the government, I think it's high time we include the principle of the owner taking ownership, the owner being anyone who's in this platform or anyone that is doing the work of government, whether direct or indirect. Because for me, I think we tend to take things at face value without necessarily validating whether this thing is true or not true, or whether it's valid or not valid. Like, for example, if a mechanic tells me earlier in the morning when I leave the car, or when I leave it for service, that it's gonna require, for example, just oil, and then during the day, I'm being called that now, it requires a brake fluid. Sometimes you tend to say, no, they know better. I just want a car that is moving, that is reliable, without necessarily validating that perhaps that the brake fluid was necessary for that particular service. So by saying the owner need to take ownership, all of us collectively, whether direct or indirect, we needed to drive the narrative that we need to assist government or to hold those who are doing the work of government to be able to be responsible for whatever action that they're taking. I think I'll make pointers I'm elaborating, but I'm just going to be short, David Dumel. So in your house, for example, if you bring bits to come and paint, and then if I spill your paint, sometimes I tend to pay for that particular paint. But we don't see that happening in government. So what I want to propose first is that we need to separate between technical things, non-technical, as well as negligence. Well, the technical could be maybe we have underestimated, like Veron was saying, in terms of our planning. But some of the things are non-technical. Some of the things are due to negligence. But we don't hold anyone to that. So the first thing that I want to say is that we can be more we can drive value for money when it's personal, but when it comes to citizen value for money, sometimes we become negligent. So the first thing that we need to do, we need to, as champions of government's work, to take time and effort to validate whatever you are told, especially when it comes to project management. Like, for example, the example that I was making earlier, if the mechanic tells you, no, we need spark plugs, for example, they were not there in the list that you get when you leave the car, they must be able to prove to you that they were necessary and why they were missed in the morning when you leave the car. So that's the first point that I want to leave with the team. The second one, Verona spoke about the 8 challenges that face project management. For me, I fail to understand if you can be able to bring the team legal, finance, and actuaries, and we still find ourselves facing load shedding now to date. I'm not sure how many years from Midopi CS, but you still allow and accept the excessive cost of infrastructure, cost overruns, schedule delays. It also talks to the point that I was talking to earlier to say, what was the point of bringing all these experts? So the message that I want to leave now on this one is just to say, whenever maybe going forward, we needed to ensure that there is proper preventative audit or probity audit whenever you go to tender. Like, for example, when you bring a bid specification committee, that bid specification committee needed rather to take time, even if it can be a year, but ensure that whatever government procures is what government needs. In the example that the Veronica put is that sometimes you tend to put a project there and then later on is now redefined. I've seen some projects, for example, the government will come and build a taxi rank, and later on they will change, no, it was not necessary, then they put a monument. So the cost at the taxpayer is very high, and as well as the citizens. So we needed to put those controls because...
Can we get to the end of this question? Can we move on as well, please? It's Renee speaking. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay. No, thanks, Renee. Let me pause here.
Thanks, Pizzo. Landiwe, over to you.
Very quickly, thanks very much again for a very good presentation. Just Verona, I was wondering that I know generally all the projects tend to actually go beyond what is budgeted for. But would you perhaps maybe just elaborate from your own experience, which sectors in the infrastructure that are prone for, if you like, cost overruns? Is it roads, water? I'm just quite keen to actually find out which of those, from your experience in our country, that tended to be actually worse on that aspect. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions and I think the broad points that have been raised. I know that not everything was a question, but I am going to ask Veron that she reflects on what has been said and give her views. And I'll also add, some of the, thoughts that I have around what has been raised. And then from there, while we do that, the next set of questions can be will be raised. So just raise your hand in the meantime. Veron?
I want to say thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Victor. I take Andrew's point on the generalization. It is true, and that's because it was more a reflection of what we're seeing in general. It wasn't a look at any sectors or any particular projects. And I also think that might also answer Alundiwe's question on which sectors. We haven't gone into which sectors. We looked at it from a high level upon reflection on our experiences in general without looking into the sectors. But like I said, we have gone into like the contributing factors and the root causes, but from a generic point of view. And maybe if Boitumelo allows, we could go into that, but I imagine it could be a more involved projects when you want to look at who's more efficient and which sectors are we seeing most of these issues and things like that. But I mean, there's a point Andrew made is like, okay, maybe let's run with the ones that can. And I also want to say that maybe let's run with the ones that can, but we also still need to not leave the ones that can't behind. We need to find a way to have everybody catch up at some point. And I do get his point on the investment-driven infrastructure. And if we had the projects to put through, we would be driving that. And unfortunately, there isn't much to work with at the moment. And we're trying to resolve that. Yeah. And Pizzo, no, I take Pizzo's point, and those are some of the views we share. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Veron. I think from my perspective, without necessarily repeating everything that you have said, given where we are, and this is important, given where we sit as a unit in GTAC and the kinds of issues that we deal with, I mean, even going into implementation challenges is not something that we generally focus on, because we are more on the, let's say, upstream, midstream, given that our primary role is to, give advice before investment decisions are being made. But we realized that, there is a need for us and the people that we generally work with to understand that side a little bit better. So yes, I agree that there are some generalizations in some respects, but I mean, the infrastructure ecosystem is quite complex. Even if we were to look at roads and just roads within, across provinces and the like, the message or the observations would still be a mixed bag in some way. So it is quite high level at the moment because of where we sit. Over time, we will get into sectors, into specific industries, into specific types of interventions that we want to look at, and so on, and so forth. And maybe the second point that I just wanted to say, and to Peter's point, is that I agree that we as a collective have to take responsibility, but taking responsibility does not mean that I suddenly have to leave my job or leave the office go to Eskom power plant and think that I'll be able to fix a boiler that has broken down. I do think that, again, it's a matter of coming up with interventions that we think will be helpful in terms of the various issues that we are dealing with, but also holding people accountable. I believe that, if I give wrong advice, honestly speaking, why not fire me? And I hope I don't get fired for for some of these things. But the point is that yes, as a system, as a collective, we do have to find ways of assisting each other. But at the same time, we need to hold people accountable. And that's what I believe in. And it's also the thing that actually underpins the PFMA. If you look at it. And then maybe the last point that I would just mention is around Andrew's point, spending enough, versus spending well. Look, in my case, I haven't gotten to a point where I even make some of those distinctions. What I know is that we are not spending enough and we are not spending well. Sometimes I make this example when we talk about funding issues. I say we've got 3 issues, funding issues. We are not spending enough, yet there are, there's underspending. At the same time, there's a need to be spending more, and our infrastructure costs are simply, well, in some cases, are out of sync in terms of the cost that we are paying with what you would find elsewhere, either within the country comparing similar projects, or what you find in South Africa versus other countries. All I know is that we are not spending enough and we are not spending well of our allocated funds. And for that reason, when we are coming up with solutions, unless we understand some of these issues a little bit better, our interventions will either be effective or not, because we may not be properly diagnosing the issues. Next, Pale, followed by Bianca, and I won't come in between. No, Mamot, in that order. Pale, we are starting with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues, and thanks, Veron, for a good presentation. I have 2 questions. One I've seen my colleague has already posted on the chat. My first question is, and I'm making a follow-up on the statement that Veron has made, that says there is a concept of high challenges of implementation of infrastructure project in government. And the presentation highlighted challenges and also made some recommendations. But my question is, have we made benchmarking with project management in corporate or outside government? Their success factors. And why are they so successful that we are not? So the recommendations that has been made by Veron, have they been benchmarked with best practices outside government in terms of infrastructure project implementation? That's my question. And the second one, like I said, there is one that has been put on the chat to say, based on the current project that is in IGR on the development and implementation of IDMS, infrastructure development management something. What is system? Yeah. What's your take as GTAC on that matter? Because it is us as treasury and relevant stakeholders trying to actually address some of the challenges that Veron has actually identified, and some of the ways of making it better in infrastructure development, infrastructure implementation, procurement and implementation in government. Those are my two questions. Thanks, Wituman.
Thanks, Putumelo. I'm just glad that the question was raised, because I was going to mention it also, because they got funding for that from us. So it was just interesting to see that GTAC has done work on it. So that's great. My question is regarding BE, right, race. I don't see it was addressed, so I know Andrew was saying, you know, there was blanket statements made, but for me, this is South Africa we're dealing with. So there was a project that faced quite an upheaval in terms of BE. The project actually got stopped because the locals, what's the lovely word, protested in terms of the area. So that stopped that and work couldn't continue. And then Treasury enforced the BE regulations on that. So just looking at BE being an enabler or a hindrance for a project when it comes to infrastructure is something that I'd like guidance on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for the presentation. Mine is it's just a frustration because I've been in this industry for 10 years, more than 10 years now. But I can see the same challenges that Veron has highlighted are still coming strong at this stage. But mine is on the mix at a portfolio level, as well as the instruments that we're using as all stakeholders, because really IDMS has been introduced as one system and it is coming up with the best practice. But at a portfolio level, we lack the integration of the social and economic infrastructure, and we are investing also in areas where there is no calculation and scientific identification where to invest. Then if we go to the project pipelines, we are now unable to even address that part of integration, because you will see the entities, you'll see the municipalities, they are not pushing the principles of IDMS. If then we can come in with that strong view and agree not as a province, as a nation, that we are really adopting the IDMS, then we will go far and then address the issues of the capacity. My worry is the NIP 2050 has been gazetted. No one is talking about it in terms of saying, are we then prioritizing those focus areas so that at least when we are dealing with our projects and project pipelines, we align ourselves with those instruments that are there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for those questions and comments, colleagues. Veron, again, I think you can reflect, and I'll also do the same. Just wish Pule was here, because I've just checked, he's not on the line, you know, to talk about some of these IDMS issues, but it's fine. Let's do what we can.
Thank you, and thanks for the question, Pale. So for the first one, which is about, did we benchmark ourselves against, you know, what the private sector can do or other places? I actually tried to do that. It's really hard to find that kind of evidence, and this is what Andrew has been trying. Andrew kind of wants to see as well. So we haven't done that yet, and our recommendations are just based on what we're seeing and what we think will work. So the answer to that question is no, but we hope we can provide you with more evidence, and so we can have more evidence base, but we know what we're seeing, and the people on the ground know it is the same things that they're seeing as well. And we definitely think, you know, what we are thinking about could work in that regard with addressing some of these issues. And what I maybe want to add is some of these issues are not, I mean, they're not easy. They're not, what's the word we use? Green shoots or low-hanging fruit. Some will take time, but we work towards addressing them, right? We don't take the easiest. Everything needs to be done. So some are hard, some are easy, but they all have to be implemented. The GTAC's position, I don't know if I should be talking on behalf of GTAC, but the GTAC does apply and follow the IDMS, and it's also a big part of what we're doing in the BFI as well. We use IDMS, stages and everything to appraise and determine whether projects are what we're looking for. So yeah, we are in line in terms of that. Bianca. Abidumelo, if I'm skipping through, you can, send me back to answer. I have some notes. Bianca, BE, I mean, regulatory issues are noted in what we're doing, and we see them as external factors that are beyond, obviously, the control of the client and delivery teams, but they are, in some cases, are impediments, and that's why we have had the PPP reviews recently. Those kind of things we are looking into, and I read recently that there's going to be relaxation of some rules when it comes to environmental impact assessments for renewables and stuff like that. So there is a lot of issues there too, but it wasn't the focus of the study. It's seen as external. We went a bit into that, but we didn't discuss further. So yeah, things like BEE and targeting during procurement and things like that were not we didn't really go into that. I don't know if Maduma's was a question or comment, but basically they're saying they're seeing the same issues and nothing ever changes, and this is why we're here as well. We've been talking about infrastructure forever. I did my master's on infrastructure investment on growth, and the same issues, it's the same infrastructure, but we're still having the same conversations, still having the same challenges. So nothing ever changes, and we are trying to see if we can't pull some levers to make changes there, and that's why we're having this conversation, and we're trying to reflect at where is it going wrong and where can we start. And the reason why we only presented this half is because we want to bites. And when Andrew said, oh, it's not as gloomy, I'm like, you should have seen the rest of the stuff I have. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't change, and we are here to hopefully change. And if people in the platform have any ideas on how we move forward, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my perspective, let me start with the IDMS. And as I said, I wish Pule was here. It's not necessarily about the position of GTAC on IDMS. It's about IDMS as the system that underpins everything that we do. And if I had to state what my position is, as GTAC, we support the IDMS. We think that IDMS is a good planning system that helps to sort of see projects across different lenses and stages. The fact that you are moving from portfolio into program into operations and management, and I think the last one is project, which is where sort of this presentation touched a lot more on, rather than on the other aspects. What is important, and we've sort of seen this. I mean, IDMS is so-called best practice. I've heard from some colleagues who are outside of the Treasury who said, yeah, but IDMS is asking for things that are simply impossible for us to meet as a country, given where we are, and those kinds of things. I don't always know how to respond to those things, except that at least where I sit, maybe I don't see those, the same issues that they see, but I really see it as a good system that if we were to follow it, and maybe I'm also looking at it in a linear format, it would resolve a lot of the issues that we have. And I think what we need to do at some point is to get Pule and his team to also come and talk to us about some of these IDMS issues as part of the infrastructure theme that we've been having. And then two, it's on Mahmoud's question, well, actually comment around the same issues and whatnot. And I think, I mean, by and large, the issues are sort of, broadly speaking, sort of similar. But to Andrew's earlier point, look, we have seen pockets of excellence in some sectors, in some industries, in very specific areas. So as much as, I mean, the broad issues, will have remained issues for a considerable amount of time. We've also seen pockets of excellence come up every so often. So I think that we need to acknowledge that, and perhaps as part of future outputs briefs for us as a unit is to go and try and bring out some of these pockets of excellence. We had, but I don't think it was on this platform. We had the IPP office actually came and presented to us around, and they have, in my view, they are a pocket of excellence. They spoke to us around what is it that makes that program work, and we also discussed whether that is a model that is replicable to other sectors of the economy. And of course, I mean, each project and program is different, is unique in many ways, but are there lessons learned that we could be learning from some of these things? Because we see PMOs coming up, everywhere. Student housing, water, here and there, and those kinds of things. So clearly there is something that works within that space, whether that's the panacea, that we need to accelerate expediently. I don't necessarily know. So yeah, those are the comments that I just wanted to add. Can I check if there's any other question that anyone would like to ask before we start heading towards closure? We actually close, not head towards. We have 11. Is it? Yeah, we have 11 minutes.
There's a question in the chat.
The question, how does one record? I know, Anita, you'll take that one. All right, Ronette.
It's Renee. Hi, sorry, I can't put my hand up because I'm driving. As an outsider, listening to the infrastructure issues in the last half a year now, there's something that people are not addressing or not. Am I mistaken in thinking it's a problem? But it is around, and I think that discussion on the IDMS made me think about this again, that there seems to be the type of tendering processes in government, which is an impossible mess. There are enormous bureaucratic approval steps and processes that are way beyond just normal accountability, but they've moved into, I don't know, perniciousness. And I don't hear people talk about that. Is that not part of the reason you would see some of the slow progress? That if a system has been required for 5, 7, 8 years and it hasn't really taken off, is it not time to step back and say, well, maybe there's something in the design of the system that is problematic? Question, reflection, help me out here. Thanks.
Yeah, we will help you out. And we will help you out because this is another, and for those that did not hear the question, Ronette was starting to speak about procurement issues, right? There's been an outcry about how long it takes for things to move, the many approvals, this and that around procurement issues. And if I may add my own frustration, not with the process, but actually with the sponsors, the fact that it's always about design, bid, build, which is really the conventional procurement model. And I'm not saying it doesn't have its place. I think it does. But given the many challenges that we were talking about, especially related to issues of capacity and capability, I really think that we sometimes miss the opportunity to use procurement as that lever to get in the right people who can at least try to ensure that we get value for money through, you know, skills and systems and discipline that comes with the private sector. That's my own frustration. But I think, Ronette, as I was starting to say that we are going to, you know, help you with that, is because we are looking, I mean, with what we've done with Strova, what Strova effectively presented last week is work that we've sort of been doing around the upstream issues. What we are presenting today, again, is work that we've sort of been doing around downstream issues. There's a lot of work that we as a unit need to do around your midstream issues, especially in relation to procurement issues, just so that, again, once we have a better feel and better understanding of what the issues are, then we can talk about what the possible solutions are. As a unit, I don't necessarily feel that we know enough to even say to OCPO, and I have seen some of our colleagues from OCPO here. Oh, actually, PUA has raised her hand, right? I don't know enough to go to them and say, this is what I think needs to be changed. But given that PUA's hand is already up, let me ask her to come in. And I hope, PUA, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. If I am, I apologize. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The reason why I raised my hand is based on the information that they've just said with respect to zooming into infrastructure, the middle part of it. I want to actually indicate that when we do that, we'll have to make sure that we engage other stakeholders, because the infrastructure ecosystem, as you said, is complex. It is as complex when it comes to who regulates in this space. Because we've got CIDB who looks at different kind of contracts. Most of the contracts, like you have indicated, are the type of contracts whether you actually design, build, and whichever approach that you use is actually informed by CIDB prescripts and the whole kind of delivery process. And when we bring in CPE in terms of how we manage professionals. So when we work with them, when we look in the procurement space, we have to work together to make sure that we pull a bit of regulations from that institution and that institution. So in totality, that is the relationship that we have. So that brings the complexity actually in this kind of procurement setup. So I wanted to bring your attention to that as we are working. That is not going to be OCPO, because our role is quite limited as we partner with CIDB. But in terms of policy, we have make sure that we set policy, and operationally they have to standardize specifically for infrastructure and construction. So that relationship is quite complex, of which we will partner with you when we're actually delving into that space to make sure that it is properly managed from outside as well.
Yeah, I think fair point. And as soon as we start this undertaking, we will definitely let you know, and other colleagues, you know, who work in the space, just so that again we educate ourselves in the process. Colleagues, thank you very much. It has been very, very, very insightful. I liked the discussions, the questions, and I think it also shows that there's a lot of interest in infrastructure. I know what the next topic is going to be. If things were to go according to me, I would always have infrastructure, not because I work in the space, but because I think there's so much that you know, we could talk about and we could resolve if we, you know, sat like this and we tried to understand the issues before we venture into trying to resolve those. So yeah, Thank you very much, firstly, to Veron for the job well done on the presentation, to yourselves as participants in this webinar, and to our GTAC comms team for organizing these weekly webinars. Please feel free to make contact with us if there's anything that you would like to engage on. Post the webinar. Yeah, thank you very much and have a lovely weekend. Long weekend for some people. Yeah. Thank you and bye-bye.
Hey.
Thank you, Boitumelo.
Thank you, Boitumelo. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Veron.
Bianca is clearly a fan.